Good morning. It is good to see you this morning, and I'm excited to be here to let you know that I had a lot of good help this week as far as getting my lesson prepared in advance and doing that. I had my slides all laid out, and I sent them to CR to make sure they were right. And this morning I got into Bible class, and I thought, I haven't checked on those this weekend. I hope I got the right ones sent to him. So as soon as my class was over and I got through, I ran back here and checked with CR. I said, CR, I said, pull up the slides. I've got to see if I got the right ones in there. He said, okay. So we checked, and sure enough, they were in there, and I went, whew. And then I realized I had the wrong sermon in my Bible. So I got that one, and I'm glad I had it, and everything was ready. But this morning we're going to be talking about Jesus and our children who learn. In Ephesians 6, verses 1 through 3, something's not right. That's not right. Did I do that? What do they learn? That is right. I'm sorry. What do they learn? I love things that children come up with. And don't get me wrong. I know that our children have come up here today and they've sung and they've done a great job and they've gone out and they're in Bible times and they're learning about the Bible, and I'm glad that we do that. And whenever I was a young person, a young parent, my children went to Bible worship training is what we called it, and we wanted them to understand what worship was all about and to go through that. And other churches that I've been to, we had Bible times and Bible hour and everything. I think those are great things to do. But parents train their children in a lot of things. And I'm excited to tell you that Brian Bill, a man that I've read quite extensively over the last several months, has really got it nailed down. And he makes a synopsis of some things that I think are very important and gives us an illustration I want to share with you. I love the things that children come up with. A Sunday school teacher asked her class one day why it was so important to be quiet in the worship service. One bright girl replied, well, because people are sleeping. People are sleeping. I'm going to be honest with you. They took a poll of people that slept in church and found out that if they laid them end to end, they'd be more comfortable. I think that fits. It's true. But training children and realizing some of the things that they come up with. After coming home from church one day, a little boy suddenly announced to his parents, I've decided to become a minister when I grow up. Dad smiled, puffed out his chest. Mother said, well, what made you come up with that? He said, well, the little boy said, I have to go to church on Sunday anyway, and I figured it'd be a whole lot more fun to stand up and yell than to sit down and listen. Can you imagine this as children's Bible training? Training young men to be preachers. That's what, whenever we read in the Bible about Paul teaching Timothy, it was not, he was a young man, not a child, even though he called him his son in the faith. And we understand all those things that he said. But I'm reminded of the days of the Wild West. You remember this? James Fenimore Cooper came up with a story, and it reminded me of a statement that I heard one time. His cowboy came riding up on an Indian who was laying on the ground with his ear pressed to the ground, much like this one. The Indian said, he said, stagecoach. 3 people inside. 2 men, 1 woman, 4 horses. 3 gray, 1 black. Stagecoach, moving west. The cowboy was amazed. He said, that's incredible, partner. How can you tell that just by listening to the ground? The Indian replied, no. Stagecoach run over me 30 minutes ago. Buck didn't think that was funny. My guess is that some of you parents feel the same way this morning. Many times the way that I felt as I was raising my 4 children, somebody said, "What do you know about raising kids?" I said, "Well, I've had some experience." Whenever we had our 4th child, somebody asked us, they were talking about Timothy being a baby, and Anthony was with us, and they said, "Oh, you've got a beautiful family." And I said, "Well, it's just half of them." She goes, she says, "How old was your wife when you married her? 9? And Lisa's not here. You can tell her I said that, okay? I said, "No, we just look young for our age." She goes, "She does." But we've raised 4 children, and I've loved it. I mean, it had its ups and downs. It was not easy all the time. But it's one of the things that I enjoy being able to impart and help young couples with is whenever they're having trouble dealing with their children. I used to say they don't come with an instruction book, but they do. You know that children and raising children come with a list of instructions and a lot of help. It really does. It's called being a part of a church family that cares about one another. "Oh, I don't want to tell anybody my problems." Well, they don't have any of their own. They've never experienced. That's what family is about. How many of us go to our parents and talk to them about raising our children, and we say, "Hey, my dad always said I can't wait for my children to all have teenagers." He said, "God can take me home after I see that." I said, "Why?" He said, "I want a good laugh." I said, "I wasn't that bad, was you?" And he said, "Multiply it times 4. And he said, "Yeah, you were pretty bad." And I said, "Well, I was just a kid." He said, "That's the whole point." He said, "I don't know what I'd have done if it hadn't been for God in my life." And I agree with that. I raised 4 children, and all 4 of them are my favorites. They've had ups and downs. They've had problems, but we all deal with that. You've been run over. If you're a parent, you've been run over by the demands of parenting, crushed by the pressures of child rearing, and that's a difficult thing. And you don't know whenever it happens and you get trampled in life. You don't know when it's going to happen again. You don't know when you're going to be trampled even by your own children. And when life makes it difficult on you, I think I could hear some of you mumbling this morning. Children everywhere, wet diapers, dirty feet, rebellious teenagers. I'm in need of some help. Well, when did that happen? Right now. Didn't even have to wait 30 minutes. We get those feelings, we have those difficulties, and let's be honest, for many of us, the overwhelming responsibility associated with raising children is not a funny matter. I almost decided this morning to ask everybody that's ever had to discipline their children to raise their hands, and then I realized I may be singling somebody out, and not the ones that raise their hands. Some of us may not be able to raise our hands, and I don't want you to feel left out. We all have problems raising children. Somebody says, "Yeah, but you've never had the problems I have." Oh, come talk to me. You really want to swap war stories? Let's sit down and talk. Mine may not be any worse than yours, but they're not any better. We all have difficulty. According to James Dobson, 80% of parents feel like they're failures. 80% of parents feel like they're failures. That was in 1984. This crisis of confidence is affecting families all around the country. While parenting is demanding, Dobson's concern was that too many of us find the task burdensome. Raising my children was never burdensome in that sense. Trying, yes. Difficult, absolutely. A burden, no. Just like preaching, whenever we have children, we've chosen our trials. When we become a child of God, we've chosen our trials. We know that God said that whenever we come into this world, we come out of our sin, that Satan's going to be there. He's walking around and searching like a roaring lion and someone to devour. And we wonder sometimes what it is about raising children that makes life so difficult. And that's just it. We were difficult on our parents. Oh, I was perfect. Yeah, so was I. That's my parents. But parents today have saddled themselves with unnecessary guilt, I believe, with unnecessary fear and unnecessary doubt about yourself. Listen to what Dobson writes. Parenting isn't for cowards. Y'all remember that book? Throughout the scriptures, it is quite clear that the raising of children was viewed as a wonderful blessing from God, a welcome, joyful experience. We've had enough self-condemnation. What we need now is a doable dose of confidence in our ability to raise our children properly. My attempt this morning is to encourage you not to forget your children when it comes to your relationship with Jesus. We can have children who know and who are learned in the concept of what it means to be God's children. We can raise them that way. It's not hard. It comes with an instruction book. The Bible is there. We've got each other. We've got multitudes and multitudes of years of experience and some failures, we feel. Some of us are walking around carrying burdens that we raised our children with, and that's not what God wants. I love talking to school teachers who say if the parents would just do their job, our school systems would be in good shape. Make you wonder? And I've heard more than one Christian school teacher tell me that. If the parents would just do their job of raising their children and allow us to teach them the things that education needs to teach them, the world would be better off. So parents, we must be failing. And I don't want you to turn me off and say, well, I didn't fail. None of us are perfect. I'm not saying that you failed in that sense. But I want to encourage you not to forget your children when it comes to your relationship with Jesus. We need to communicate the biblical perspective on parenting that God gives us so that we can have the confidence as parents in raising our children, so that we can have a confidence as a church to encourage our young families to raise their children in a way that God expects and that the world will appreciate. It's not always easy, is it? Simply put, our job is to teach our children how to obey. It's like the little boy who was overheard praying, Lord, if you can't make me a better boy, don't worry about it. I'm having a real good time like I am. I'm having a real good time like I am. And while the children may think that they're having a good time in disobeying, the fact of the matter is that they'll be much happier and more joyful if they can learn the biblical discipline of obedience. So how do you teach obedience to your children? It's not an easy task. It's not at all. It's very difficult, in fact. It's difficult for at least three reasons, and I want to share those with us this morning. Number one, the corruption on the outside. Now, a lot of parents have decided that the only way that they can defeat that corruption is to homeschool, and I understand the concept, but I want to present something else. That's not the only answer. If you watch and you realize and read and see what happens whenever children leave home, and I understand that a lot of you are doing well with your children, and children are doing that, but it's not news to you that our whole society is hostile to biblical truth. And often seems bent on teaching children to rebel against authority. And I believe that some of the reason for that is that more Christians are pulling away from being a light to the world instead of being a light to the world. We try to protect our children to the point where we're protecting ourselves from having to be involved in what they're doing because we're not necessarily comfortable in being ostracized. We're not necessarily comfortable at being productive in our Christianity. In 2 Timothy 3:1-2, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, and unholy. See, the curse of sin is on the inside. That's number two. Not only is the word pressuring our children to conform to a world, pressuring our children to conform to ungodliness. That's what they want. Their own depravity causes them to be naturally prone to rebellion. Because we are sinners, because we do fail, it encourages us to go off into the total depravity of what the world is offering, because I want you to know that's the easy way. It's easy to do what the world wants you to do. You don't get in trouble so much. What do you mean trouble? I mean, you don't get ostracized, you don't get picked on, you don't get made fun of. You fit in better in the world if you do what the world wants you to do. That's not what God encourages us to do. Not only is the world pressuring our children to conform to that ungodliness, but their own depravity causes them to be naturally prone to rebellion. And both of these influences work in tandem against parents who want to teach their children to obey. In Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And parents with children in public schools, I know what it's like whenever those kids come home. Timothy, whenever he was in 4th grade, we'd just moved into a new community, and I got a call from the principal 2 weeks after we'd moved there. He said, I need to talk to you. And I came in, he said, I need to talk to you about Tim. And I said, okay, what about Tim? And he said, well, Tim's using vulgar language at school. Whoops. Oh, by the way, is Tim here? He was using vulgar. I said, really? Tim? Because Tim was in 4th grade, walked around as shy as all get out. But Tim decided that he was going to break out of the mold of shyness that he had been in as he walked through the doors of that school. He said, I'm going to be somebody. It's just that he picked somebody that everybody would like, he thought. Until one of the coaches heard him say something that he shouldn't have said. And I said, well, I asked the coach, I said, he and I became really good friends later, not as a result of that, but had something to do with it. And I talked to him, I said, what do you do? I mean, what did he say? He says, you don't want to know. I said, well, did it just slip out? And he said, oh, Britt, no. He sounded like he'd been on a boat out in the ocean for about 3 weeks. He fit right in. I said, where did he learn that? And he said, from everybody else. Kids are going to pick things up. The average child in 1950 was talking about and learning about the relationships between a man and a woman by the 6th grade. Today it's by kindergarten, and not just in public school. It's because we closed our eyes and closed our ears and closed our mouths that we are in the shape that we're in this world. We're too afraid to buck the system. But you know what? There's a lot of encouragement that can come from that, because we can stand. It doesn't mean we've got to stand up, yell, and throw fits and do all that. We just got to be a light. How do you teach obedience to your children? How do you do that? Have you ever noticed that you've never had to explain to your child how to disobey? You don't teach them that. They're experts in this form from the very beginning, but obedience is something they've got to learn. Their own childlessness makes them vulnerable. See, even Jesus had to learn obedience. So wait a minute, what do you mean Jesus had to learn obedience? Well, Hebrews 5:8, son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. Admittedly, this was a tough one to think about. I mean, how can one who is sinless and perfect, omniscient God in the flesh learn anything, especially obedience? And yet, Scripture is clear that Jesus did grow. He did learn, much like every other child, except that he was without sin. Luke 2:52, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Our children need to grow in the same way because they lack wisdom. They still have room to grow spiritually, physically, mentally. They need to grow in favor with God, and they still need to acquire the necessary social skills to be able to do that. And that's a hard road for our parents in our day and age to have to do. But folks, Jesus honored his parents and he obeyed them. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to help our children in learning to obey. God made parents to shape the moral will of the children by setting biblical standards for right and wrong, and then consistently enforcing those standards until their children learn how to conduct themselves with appropriate behavior. Ephesians 6:1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. They, as children, are to obey their parents. That doesn't mean that you're to obey your parents just if they're Christians. Rather, it means that you're to obey your parents because they are your parents and because of the Lord. As if you were obeying the Lord directly, because your parents represent God to you in that sense. And notice that this is not just a simple exhortation to obey. It's not that at all. Like you might find in a booklet on parent-child relationships. It's not that at all. It's simply, children, obey your parents. It is, children, obey your parents in the Lord. The key to this command is in the Lord. Just as wives are to submit to husbands as to the Lord, the husbands are to love their wives as Christ loved the church. And so too, children are to obey their parents. Why? For the Lord's sake. Young people, you are to obey not because you like it or because it's what your parents want, but because that's what God wants. It's part of your responsibility to Christ. The last phrase in Ephesians 6:1 answers the question, well, why? Why must I obey my parents? For this is right. That's what God wants. God has written a universal moral standard on every human heart. He wants us to understand one that says that this is right. It's proper. It is essential for children to obey their parents. It is a self-evident truth. And since parents brought the children into the world, and since they have more knowledge and wisdom than the children, it is right that the child and the children should obey their parents. If they refuse to obey, things are going to go wrong. If you refuse to obey God, then things go wrong in your life. Same that's true with all of us. That's the way God set it up. But there needs to be a time of learning to honor. To honor your parents. Ephesians 6:2, honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with promise. The emphasis here is on the attitude. Not merely the act of obedience, but the attitude. The quotation from the fifth commandment describes a heart's disposition. It rules out reluctant obedience. I'll do it, but I sure don't want to. Remember me telling you the story about the little girl in the car? Standing up because she didn't want to be buckled in. Finally, her dad said, if you don't sit down and buckle in, I'm going to spank you. And a few moments later, she sat there and she looked over at her dad and she says, I'm standing up in my mind. That's obedience with reluctance. That's obeying because I have to, not because I want to. We've got to get to a point where we want to obey. And we've got to teach our children. Parents, it's wise to discipline children more for their attitudes than for their actions. It's better to discipline your children more for the attitude than the actions. Proverbs 12:1, whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid. If we can catch defiance at the point of attitude, a lot of disobedient behavior will be avoided. Children whose attitudes are right, whose honor for their parents comes from the heart, will retain a deeper respect. A deeper love for their parents throughout their whole lives. Lisa and I both lost our moms this last year, and pretty difficult for us. Because that was usually who we talked to most about our problems. I talked to my mom, she talked to her mom, she talked to my mom, I talked to her mom. We were all very close. But I miss that knowledge. I miss that. And your children will too if you impart that desire within them. There needs to be a profiting from the promise. Paul speaks to this in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 3, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life. We see two aspects of this pledge. Number one, the quality of life, that it may go well with you, and the quantity of life, so that you may enjoy long life in the earth. In other words, submission to parents is in the child's own best interest. It's not the only thing that's right in God's eyes. And it's not only right in God's eyes, but it's also best for the child because it is best for our society. Obedience will keep a child in resentment. And it'll generally prolong life and make it fuller and richer. It sounds pretty good to me. How about you? Young people, you're to obey your parents in your actions as part of your Christian duty because it's just the right thing to do. Is it easy? No, it's not. You can't just put your ear to the ground and tell what's coming. It'll run over you. You can't see it coming. It'll take you out. It'll take you out of life. And we are to honor our parents in our attitude by demonstrating our respect for them, that you'll live a happier and longer life because of. I want to ask you a couple of questions to our young people. Are you honoring or dishonoring your parents? Are you doing what they want you to do, or are you not? Do you consider their advice and their role in your life too heavy and without meaning? Proverbs 1:8, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. See, you aren't the only one that had those feelings. Everybody does. Parents, let me ask you this. Are you showing honor to your children? Or do you more often treat them as something not very valuable? Are they a burden to you, or are they a joy? Are you calling your children to an attitude of obedience that's reflected in their actions? Are you doing what Ephesians 6:4 commands us to do by bringing them up? Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. Parents, as we honor our aging parents today, I hope we're doing that. I hope we're no longer living under their authority, but yet living under their authority, living under their wisdom. I hope that we're giving them ear and listening to their hearts. I hope as our parents age that we allow their wisdom to flow within our hearts, to be a part of who we are. Are you looking for ways to demonstrate care and concern for your parents? Leviticus 19:32, stand up in the presence of the aged. Show respect for the elderly and revere your God. I am the Lord. We need the help of Jesus to do that. Actually, we need to be like Jesus. We need to do what Jesus would do. And we need to see that. To be the kind of child he wants us to be, in order that we might be also later the kind of parent that he would want us to be. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. And fathers, do not exasperate your children to wrath. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. Our Father's waiting for us to honor Him, to be what He wants us to be children, to be His children, to search for a time to be like Jesus, to want to be with Him, a desire. Do we exemplify Jesus in the life of our children? Do we honor Him with our lips in their presence? Is He first in our lives that they can see? Can they see Jesus by looking at us? Our children will learn. But let's remember our children in the Lord. Let's help bring them up where they need to be. And children, know that God's watching and He's there to help. And you've got a whole lot of help if you'll only ask. It may be this morning that you're contemplating those things in your mind, and you thought, I need to change some things. I need to do some things differently. That's what we're here for. We're a family. We're here to pray for each other, to help each other, to build each other up, and to comfort one another, to admit our failures to one another, to realize that we're not all perfect, that we all have made mistakes in bringing up our children. It happens. It's part of life. The question is, do we trust God enough to turn ourselves over to Him? I don't know where you are this morning, but if it's time for you to step out and allow God to touch your life, the invitation song is going to be for that reason. Our shepherd's going to pass among you. There's some yellow cards in the front of you and those card racks that you might need to request prayer. They'll take care of that. If you need to visit with one of them, just take them by the hand or meet somebody, some of them back in the back. They'll visit with you and talk with you. If you need to make a public confession of some kind, please feel free to come forward and let us help you do that. Share with us what your needs are so we might be able to help as a family. If you're not a child of God, all things are ready. It's time to put God first in your life. If you need to come this morning for whatever reason, don't put it off. Come now.